Hey everybody out there, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. Today, what I want to do is actually take a little bit of a break from Metroid topics, and I know that seems probably kind of shocking, but don't worry, I have plenty of other Metroid topics and conversations and theories and stuff that I have planned over the course of the next couple of weeks, and in a world where Nintendo even drops some surprise new Metroid announcements or even a trailer or something, we will obviously break that stuff down at that time as well. However, like I said, I want to take a little bit of a break and talk about something else that's been going on kind of in the world of Nintendo, and something that does have a lot of people with very passionate and divided opinions. And it has to do with Nintendo's online service and how they've really been treating their legacy content, their legacy consoles, and what used to be kind of known as really their virtual console overall strategy. Something that they were very big on the Wii, Wii U, and the 3DS. And in the Switch era, we've seen them abandon the virtual console concept, which most of us, I think, are pretty disappointed by, in favor of a monthly or a yearly paid subscription to their online service that gives us access to a selection of NES and Super NES only games. Now, like I already alluded to here, this has been a hot button topic for a lot of folks, both diehard Nintendo fans and even people who are more casual Nintendo fans or people paying attention to what they're doing from the outside who maybe still have strong opinions on how Nintendo is approaching it compared to how maybe other consoles and other platforms are doing it. Now, you guys know me, you know that I just turned 41 last week, so not only have I been experiencing all of Nintendo's attempts at reviving all of their legacy content, virtual consoles, Nintendo Switch Online, even doing NES and SNES mini consoles and that whole kind of scheme. Not only have I lived through all that stuff, I've actually lived through these actual generations where these games that we're talking about were initially released, okay? My first console I ever gamed on was the Atari 2600 before the NES even launched. So, as the NES launched, I, as a very young boy at 5 or 6 years old, played on the NES, the Super NES, the Sega Genesis, the PlayStation, the Saturn, the Nintendo 64, GameCube, Wii, Wii U, all that stuff. So I've experienced all of the games that people are really divided on, both in their day on their original consoles and all of Nintendo's subsequent attempts in the recent eras to revive them through different monetized schemes. So, as I see what's happening, I see what Nintendo's doing, I see the complaints people have, I see the people who also support it blindly, and yeah, I do have some thoughts and opinions overall on what Nintendo's doing. You guys know that it takes a lot to make me mad. I don't have any mad or heated perspectives, but I do have opinions, and I understand some of the arguments on both sides of this argument, as I tend to do. I think looking at the nuance of both sides of any argument is the healthiest way to go about it. And I do understand a lot of the different angles people have, and so I very much want to go over that stuff with you today. Of course, before we dive any deeper into the Nintendo Switch Online and Virtual Console topic, I like to remind you guys I'm always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I upload several videos every single week, and I live stream once a week. I cover all things Nintendo, I cover every single thing about the Metroid franchise, and I discuss all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So boy oh boy, another hot button Nintendo and video game topic. Coming off of the announcement of the Switch OLED just a week or two ago, this just kind of feels a little bit par for the course. However, I think it's worth noting that, and again I alluded to this in the beginning here, the conversation and the division over Nintendo's approach to their online service and to their, virtual consoles, legacy content, this conversation has been going on almost since the Switch launched, because even at the launch of the Switch, a lot of us were expecting and waiting for the reveal of the traditional virtual console. As many of us probably know, the virtual console, that exact term, quote-unquote virtual console, is a very different structure than what Nintendo is doing now on the Switch with the online service and the NES and SNES games. The virtual console was actually just a legitimate, straight-up storefront. It was a place to go to buy and download actual digital files of games you owned with a one-time purchase price based on, if it's an NES game, a Super Nintendo game, a Sega Genesis game, a TurboGrafx 16 games that were added at one point, I think, to the Wii, Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games were added at some point. I mean, they've had a lot of different consoles and storefronts for those consoles available, and it was a very popular approach to this concept. And now, as we know, the Nintendo Switch's online service has a very different approach, where there is no storefront. You can't just find a huge collection of legacy games for a specific platform and buy and own those. We are limited to only the Nintendo Entertainment System and only the Super Nintendo and only the small selection of games that Nintendo has made available for those two platforms. Now, there are pluses to this because what we're not doing is having to spend $5, $10, or $15 a pop to just buy and own one game that's downloaded on our console. Instead, for either the whatever, like $4 a month or $20 a year for the online service, we just have access to these games. It's very similar to like what the Game Pass thing is for Microsoft. And I think Game Pass is fantastic. And so if you compare it to that, it's a similar value. For less money, you have access to an ever-present online catalog of games that you can play for the NES and the Super NES. That is certainly cool, especially for the price. $4 a month or $20 a year is way less than, I think it's either $10 or $15 a month for Xbox Game Pass. I can't even remember what I'm paying for it, honestly. I think I'm paying $14.99, right? So, you know, for that price, that's a lot more money monthly and or yearly to have access to Xbox Game Pass. Granted, Game Pass is giving us access to more games and also to modern games, as opposed to Nintendo's service, which is less games and only old games. So there are differences there, but just from my own personal perspective, and I'm not making this video telling you guys to feel the way I feel. I'm only analyzing it, breaking it down, and sharing my own opinion. You are more than welcome to feel just like I do or completely different than I do. But the way I feel about it is that I still overall think for the value and for what's there, $4 a month, $20 a year, yeah, the NES and SNES online games they offer are fine for the value. But do I think that the current Nintendo Switch Online structure is better or preferable to the Virtual Console? For me, the answer is no. And again, that's something I feel that you might feel differently on. But I'm somebody who likes owning my games, whether it's physical or digital, and I don't even like digital content. But in terms of what the Virtual Console structure has been traditionally, going back to the Wii when it was first announced, I have to say that in a current world where we're accessing games for NES, SNES, or any other platforms through digital means, okay? In that respect, I would actually rather spend $5 or $10 a pop to just buy a game I know that I want and own it digitally on my console, as opposed to pay the yearly or monthly fee for the online service to only have access while I'm continuing to pay them to NES and SNES games. I would prefer the Virtual Console structure because that also means we could hopefully have access to things like Nintendo 64 games and Game Boy Advance games, or even bringing back something like Sega Genesis games. That, to me, is just overall more appealing and interesting and more valuable to me in my preference with my gaming history and how I like to spend my money on video games. Do I hate what they're doing with the Switch Online and the NES and SNES games? No, I don't hate it, nor do I think it's even a ripoff for what they're charging. But it's not what I would prefer. So my personal opinion is I would rather have the Virtual Console storefront than the Switch Online rotating service. Now, part of the reason this conversation keeps coming up, and part of the reason it's even coming up right now and making me want to talk about it a little bit, is because every once in a while, Nintendo will drop an update of, here's the new NES or SNES games we're adding to the current Switch Online service. And, I mean, after the initial probably 2 or 3 dumps years ago when the service launched, pretty much we've been getting games that are not exciting and not what people are looking for. And so, part of the problem, I think, is that when the NES and SNES stores first individually launched, they launched with, for the most part, some of the strongest games available on both of those platforms. And so they started off strong with all the Zelda and Metroid games and Mario games you could really want for the NES and SNES. And then as you get several months or several years away from those initial launches, Nintendo has been having to go deeper and deeper into the pool of more obscure games that no one really cares about or sees as exciting. And granted, there are games that Nintendo is still missing an opportunity on, but at this point, we're kind of getting to only third-party titles where maybe licensing issues are part of what we're running into. I don't really know. It's just something that I think about, but we're basically at the point where every time Nintendo announces new games for either of these consoles on the Switch Online service, they're not great games, and so it gets people up in arms and upset again about how bad they think the service is, how crappy they think the quality of games are, and the fact that they think the Switch Online service is a bad service and that it's overpriced. And I get the argument, and I get that opinion. I think there maybe even is some truth to that. You know, for some people, I think that they're going to see things that way. And I think that that's fair. They have the right to see it that way and maybe say that Switch's online service just isn't worth it, whether for the online gameplay or for the NES and SNES games. I do understand that. I personally don't really care. I mean, I'm not here to defend the bad games they keep announcing, because I agree, they keep announcing bad, uninteresting games for NES and SNES that I personally don't care about. So I'm not here to defend those games. I guess I'm just here to say that I no longer really care. And so when I see games announced that I don't like, I'm like, well, those games are bad. I guess I won't play them. And I kind of just move on with my day. Because at this point, the ability to access Switch games online and the access to the games on NES and SNES that currently exist is already worth the $20 a year I'm paying. So even adding more games that I don't like, it's not taking away from the fact that to me, it's already matched the value of $20 a year that I think it's worth. So adding new games that I don't care about isn't personally taking away from that. I agree that they're not great games, and I also agree that Nintendo would do better to improve their legacy content on their Switch service, whether it's adding new consoles beyond NES and SNES, or going back to a virtual console storefront instead, or whatever. I do want them to do more. I think that they should be doing better, but as far as what's there, it's like, you know, it is what it is. I don't personally really care, so I'm not someone who's out there getting up in arms about what they're doing. I think this kind of segues me to the last point I want to make on this video and really kind of end on this topic. And it is the idea of if Nintendo will ever increase or add to the platforms available on the current Switch Online service. They do seem uninterested in the virtual console, and it does also seem like the introduction of their classic consoles like NES and Super NES, the physical consoles we buy and just plug into our TV with a collection of games, it seems like maybe those two things have kind of changed their approach to the Switch Online service. And because they want people to be paying them every month or every year for the online service, I think that they see more value in making us have to pay to have access to these classic consoles than just letting us buy them for $5 or $10 a pop. I think they're probably making more money with what they're doing now, and so maybe from a business sense, that's just the choice they're making. And so the question we've been asking for a long time is, are you going to add Nintendo 64 games? Are you going to add Game Boy Advance or DS games? Maybe even something as awesome as Nintendo GameCube games. Would they add those games and those platforms to the current Switch service? I can tell you right now that I really, really would like to see them do that. I would start using that service a lot more if N64 or Game Boy Advance or even GameCube games, and I have a GameCube, I mean, I've got these consoles, but if they added them to the Switch in the online service, yeah, I would start using it a lot more, and I think that a lot of people would see it as more valuable than it is now. But of course, the idea of Nintendo adding new platforms and new consoles could potentially present a different problem, where we might see them choose to raise the overall price of the online service, you know, where again, it's like $20 a year or $4 a month. Maybe it becomes $25 to $30 a year, and maybe it becomes $7 or $8 a month. And you know, would that be the right call or not? I don't know. Would that be too much money or not? I guess I don't really know yet. But what I do know is that if this stuff happened, people would lose their minds. I think the PR would be really, really bad. I do kind of think most people would probably still continue to pay for the service. So to be fair, I think that people might be angry, but I don't think they would vote with their wallet in a way that matches that anger. So Nintendo may not care and choose to do it knowing people are still going to pay it. But, I mean, this is all really speculation at this point. It's really tough to say. We don't know if they're going to add new platforms, and if they did, we don't know if they would raise the price. I mean, in a world where they added N64 and Game Boy Advance games or whatever, and they didn't raise the price, to me, that would be a great sign. That would be a huge, positive, good move, I would think. And hopefully people would agree with that, you know? I mean, it's tricky because, you know, some of the debates and the fights that I see out there is a lot of people comparing like the Wii U specifically and the fact that it had a fantastic virtual console on the Wii U, so good. And I mean, you guys know, I love the Wii U. One of my favorite consoles, so underrated, so underappreciated. I defended it back in the day, and I defend it even today in the Switch era, where it's less cool to like the Wii U than ever before. I still will defend it, and one of its best features was an amazing virtual console. And so we do have people out here, you know, getting upset about, you know, if you supported the Wii U's virtual console, you shouldn't like the Switch Online, or if you like the Switch Online, where were you during the Wii U when it had a virtual console? And, you know, I understand those arguments. I know where people on both sides of that argument are coming from. I see it as messy, and I almost see it as pointless to really have a debate and an argument like that, because that's the past, and it's in the past, and it's possible to have supported the Wii U but also not be happy with today's Switch Online, or vice versa, or both. I mean, I can understand people having all different opinions when you compare the Wii U virtual console to the Switch Online. I mean, it's just everyone's unique and everyone has their own perspectives, and so I don't really see the point of trying to get mad at people about that and convince them to see it one way or another. Which kind of goes back to my thesis statement at the beginning of this video, where I'm not even trying to make you guys see my point. I'm not out here trying to convince you that my perspective on the Switch Online service is what you should also feel. I don't care if your opinion is totally different than mine. I don't care if my opinion is totally different than yours. I just like sharing my perspective, and hopefully it gives people something to think about, and maybe they agree with me or they don't, or they meet somewhere in the middle, and that's fine. We could all have these different opinions. I just think it's interesting to hear how different people have different approaches, and like I tend to usually say, as long as no one is being an asshole about their opinions and making other people feel stupid for having a different opinion. I don't care if your opinion is different than mine. Let's just not fight about it. I just want to share how I feel. And so anyway, maybe I got a little bit preachy there at the end, and I didn't really necessarily mean to, but that's just kind of how I see things. You know, Nintendo's approach to legacy content right now in the Switch era is definitely different than in their previous eras. And, like I said, to me, what they're doing now is also less preferable. I would rather have a virtual console storefront than a Switch Online rotating monthly payment service. You know, monthly or yearly, whatever the case. I would prefer the virtual console to what they're doing now, yes. But what they're doing now doesn't ruin my day. I don't think it's even a ripoff as far as what they charge for it. And I think it's fine. I hope they improve it. I think that it should be improved and hopefully not charged more money for. But that remains to be seen. So this is just my opinion, my take on what's going on, and, you know, the arguments, the divisiveness that we see out there, and what I think Nintendo is doing, and how I liked what they did in the past a little bit more. So these are my thoughts. What do you guys think, man? I know it's a hot button topic. I know people will be all over the place. Hopefully no one's fighting and yelling at each other, but that does usually tend to happen, so you can't really stop it. What do you think about it? Talk about it below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.